Tommy Lee has a history of rebellion, jealousy, and rage, but few know about his darkest act. If there's one person who perfectly encapsulates the party animal rock star persona, it's Tommy Lee, with headline-claiming escapades that have ranged from hilarious to downright disturbing. Lee is a pop culture icon that refuses to fade into obscurity. Tommy Lee was born far from the place in which he would first find fame. The soon-to-be drummer was in fact born in Athens. His father was an American army sergeant, and his mother was native to Greece. When he was only 2 years old, his family made a decision that changed the course of his life forever. Lee and his family moved to sunny California, but no one could have guessed just how successful the young boy would become, or how turbulent that success would be. Lee's future career beckoned him from a young age. Rebellious from the beginning, he dropped out of his high school in order to chase a career in music. His first band, Sweet 19, catapulted Lee into the LA club scene, and they often played the same venues as other soon-to-be greats like Van Halen. The exposure Lee received during this time was crucial to the formation of a new and much more successful Crüe. Sweet 19 had its own following, but it wouldn't be the band that cemented Lee's fame. In 1981, he and his friend Nicky Sixx had a transformative idea. They decided to start a new heavy metal music group together, calling themselves Mötley Crüe. It wasn't long before guitarist Mick Mars and vocalist Vince Neil joined. With a full lineup of musicians, the group embarked on a new journey, heading straight for glory and trouble. Lee and his bandmates didn't have to wait long for Mötley Crüe to take off. They released their debut album under their own label in 1981. However, just 1 year later, Elektra Records took them on and re-released the album to a much larger audience. Sure, Mötley Crüe was prolific in the studio, but the energy paled in comparison to Tommy Lee's wild antics on stage. Mötley Crüe's live performances were shocking spectacles. Lee in particular often partook in crowd-wowing shenanigans like setting up his drum set inside a large spinning cage. But that wasn't all. He also often mooned the crowd at their shows, but this particular performance got him into some serious trouble. In 1990, some showgoers took offense to Lee's crude antics. Authorities charged the drummer with indecent exposure after he mooned a crowd of about 6,000 during one of their shows in Georgia. Authorities were kind enough to let Mötley Crüe's mooning menace finish the last 30 minutes of the set before taking him in. But this was actually one of his most tame on-stage offenses. It wasn't all fun and games at the group's live shows. Disturbingly, Tommy Lee tried to spark a riot at one of their shows in 1997. He and Sixx incited members of the show to assault a security guard. Lee didn't immediately face any repercussions for his actions, but he turned himself in a couple of years later. Guilty conscience, perhaps? This wasn't the only time Lee took issue with his on-site security. Working security for Mötley Crüe shows must have been stressful enough without having to worry about the band itself turning against you. Authorities charged Lee and Sixx for hurting a security guard who tried to stop the musicians from bringing audience members onto the stage. They sentenced Lee to 30 days behind bars for the offense. But the origin of Lee's energy didn't all stem from a natural place. While Lee possessed a certain vibrancy that contributed to his rowdy performances, his stamina had a dark side. Mötley Crüe famously partook in a wide variety of illicit substances. Pretty much everything under the sun was fair game. With the amount of touring the group did, Lee and his bandmates had to get pretty creative to bring their personal stash along for the ride. Lee and his bandmates weren't about to let something like customs put a stop to their good times. Whether on their tour bus or the band's private jet, the group had methods of sneaking their party fuel through security. Lee has since made it clear that the illicit substances never went inside his body for smuggling purposes. They instead made use of emergency exits on the buses and loose flaps in the jet. Talk about bold. Lee is currently married to internet personality and actress Brittany Furlan, but she certainly isn't the star's first love. The musician had gotten married 4 separate times in his life, the majority of which were to other high-profile celebrities such as himself. Among these women, however, there was one in particular that matched, and perhaps even surpassed, Lee's own level of stardom. Tommy Lee first met Pamela Anderson at a New Year's Eve party in 1994. A model and Baywatch actress, Anderson possessed a similar level of fame. The two stars instantly hit it off, and partied hard into the night before Anderson gave Lee her number. After the festivities, Lee wanted to see Anderson again, and his affection could easily be construed as an obsession. While partying at a club, Tommy Lee and Pamela Anderson's initial spark turned into a raging fire. In her documentary, Pamela, A Love Story, Anderson described the night as a big happy blur, and Lee definitely felt the same. As the hours passed, his feelings intensified to such a degree that he decided to ask her to marry him. Without hesitation, Anderson accepted Lee's hasty proposal. What's more, they rushed straight to the altar. Just 4 days after meeting up in Mexico, the couple stood on the beach, she in her bikini and he in his shorts, and said, "I do." It certainly seemed like the beginning of a promising love story, but this was a celebrity couple destined for heartbreak. Tommy Lee may be a bit of a wild character, but he can also be quite romantic. In the early days of his marriage to Anderson, he surprised her by reciting words of love while atop a horse, adorned in shining armor like a regular Prince Charming. The deep and heartfelt love between Lee and Anderson was palpable, but an intimate aspect of the relationship was about to go public against their wishes. While Lee and Anderson's house was under heavy construction, they first made an upsetting discovery. They found that their safe, the contents of which included their most cherished and personal possessions, was missing. However, it would take a couple of years for Tommy Lee to realize the extent of the damage wrought. 1997 marked the beginning of a horrible ordeal, particularly affecting Lee's wife, Anderson. The couple received a tape in the mail, the contents of which involved the couple partaking in intimate activities. To make things even creepier, it was clearly a splice of the spiciest moments from their home movies, tapes that disappeared along with the safe 2 years ago. Not long after, someone approached Lee and his wife with a shocking proposition. Lee received a troubling offer regarding the stolen tape. Bob Guccione, founder of Penthouse, had somehow gotten his hands on a copy of the tape and offered Lee and his wife $5 million in cash for the rights, which they refused. The distressed couple hoped that was the end of it, but sadly, their nightmare was just beginning. Lee had refused the deal, but this decision did little to dissuade the video's circulation. Someone leaked the tape onto the web, and it became one of the first truly viral videos on this newfangled thing they called the Internet. The primary offender was an adult website with the surprisingly tame name of Internet Entertainment Group, or IEG. Understandably, Lee and Anderson wanted justice for this affront to their privacy. Initially, Lee and Anderson weren't about to let IEG get away with profiting from the wrongfully distributed tape. They resolved to sue the website for profiting from their video without their consent, but the psychological strain that resulted from the legal battle began to weigh heavily on Lee and his family, and it forced them to make a drastic decision. Lee and Anderson eventually dropped the lawsuit, as the mental toll was becoming too much for her to bear, and she worried for her safety of her unborn child. Not long after they dropped the case, IEG began hosting the tape once again. Lee and his wife would never see any compensation for the circulation of the tape. Interviewed on his company's practices, IEG's president stated, "I don't feel like we've done anything negative." Yikes. Unfortunately for Lee, the infamous tape wasn't the only thing getting him in trouble. While Lee has a number of tattoos, there was only one that caused him any trouble. Lee had a tattoo of a hate symbol linked to a dark chapter in history. The ink sparked a heated discussion from the public as to its meaning, specifically as to whether its intended meaning was that of the symbol's original concept, that of the holy symbol, or a less savory meaning, you know the one. But with his day in court fast approaching, the situation somehow got worse. The prospect of such a controversial tattoo may not seem to correlate with the assault charges, and it didn't. But as it turned out, the photographer happened to be Jewish. You can probably see why Lee's lawyer wasn't too keen to discuss their client's tattoo. Even if the two things weren't really related, it didn't paint Lee in the most sympathetic light. In 1998, Lee's day in court had finally come. The drummer ended up pleading no contest to the charge of battery and was sentenced to 2 years of probation as well as anger management counseling. Lee also had to pay over $17,000 in restitution to the victim. As for the tattoo that inflamed the situation, Lee has since had it removed to evade any further confusion. On one occasion, Pamela Anderson had to kiss her co-star David Kokachi. Tommy Lee's reaction was utterly disturbing. According to Anderson, he trashed my trailer on the set, put his fist through a cabinet. I apologized for not telling him, lying, as he put it, and told him it wouldn't happen again. After their second son Dylan was born, Lee quickly became distraught by the fact that he essentially became the third most important person in his wife's life. This new family dynamic started to become too much for Lee to really process, and in 1998, things took an extremely ugly turn. In 1998, things between Lee and Anderson reached a violent boiling point. After Lee struck out at Anderson during a brutal argument, Anderson was worried about the safety of her children and called the authorities. They arrived at their house and apprehended Lee, charging him with domestic battery. Lee certainly regretted his actions, but the fallout destroyed his family and created a heartbreaking rift between himself and the love of his life. Lee's mistreatment of Anderson landed him in prison for 6 months. Anderson was happy about the outcome and said it was the first step towards healing. Desperate, Lee sent his wife countless letters in an attempt to win her back, but Anderson's response was heart-wrenching. No amount of apologies could make Anderson take Lee back. She wrote in her diaries how badly this broke her heart. I never loved someone so deeply, and by deeply I mean I loved his soul. I feel like part of me has died. A messy divorce ensued, accompanied by an even messier custody battle. Lee and Anderson came to agree that things weren't going to work out, but this merely brought to light a new and pressing question: who was going to take the kids? Anderson desired full custody, firmly believing that Lee's visits with his children should be monitored. The battle resulted in the parents receiving joint custody over their children. However, this would not be the last moment of drama between Lee and his now ex-wife. At the 2007 MTV Awards, Lee had an altercation with Anderson's new husband, Kid Rock, and security forced him out of the event. And while Tommy Lee may have gotten the boot, Kid Rock would be the one to get nailed with the charges. Lee's time with Mötley Crüe has had its fair share of tumult. The other members of the band allegedly sued Lee's manager for forcing the drummer to take on television roles that hampered his ability to continue his duties to the band. Despite officially leaving the group, Lee still recorded a new studio album with the other members. The separation, if you can call it that, was not to last. In 2014, Lee accompanied the other members of Mötley Crüe on their farewell tour, but it was probably wrong to call it a real farewell, as Mötley Crüe has toured dozens of times since 2014. Clearly, Lee seems to be pretty bad at saying goodbye. While he seems inseparable from Mötley Crüe, Lee has made a point of forging his musical identity outside the band. Tommy Lee's impressive discography doesn't end with Mötley Crüe. In fact, the star has released several solo studio albums, completely separate from Mötley Crüe. He even started a rap metal group called Methods of Mayhem. Clearly, prolific is an understatement for this musician's career. And it doesn't stop there. It seems that Lee has a talent for anything that combines musicality with high-energy thrills, and DJing is no exception. Touring with his friend DJ Arrow under the name Electro Mayhem, the two musicians have graced many clubs and stages with their electronic dance music. Beyond music, Lee has also expressed other passions. Lee's main passion may be music, but he also cares deeply about wildlife advocacy. As both a supporter and member of the animal rights organization PETA, Lee has done his fair share in the world of animal rights, including writing a letter to the president of SeaWorld regarding the park's treatment of Tilikum the orca. Bizarrely enough, this wasn't the end of the story. Lee's next reason for correspondence with SeaWorld would be for more personal reasons. On another occasion, Lee wrote to SeaWorld imploring them to stop using Mötley Crüe's song during their Shamu rock shows. He wrote that, although we like to torture the human fans who willingly come to our shows, we don't want to be a part of making innocent animals' lives hellish. The enterprising musician has recently discovered another trending means of consistent income. You can find Tommy Lee strutting his stuff on the popular website OnlyFans and bask in whatever he's posting for $19.99 a month. We did our research, but we weren't about to open that door. There seems to be no end to the star's creativity in terms of revenue streams. And when it comes to success, it appears to be hereditary in Lee's family. It may come as no surprise that considering their parents, Dylan and Brandon Lee have garnered their own prospective followings as celebrities. Dylan has seen success as a model on the runway, and Brandon has entered the acting world, nailing a handful of roles. While Lee's sons are accomplished professionals, his relationship with his children hasn't always been one of unconditional love. None of us are strangers to a family feud here and there, but Lee's altercation with his son Brandon seemed to reach new heights. Fingers were pointed on both sides, and Lee ended up in the hospital with a busted up lip. Add a string of malicious tweets from both father and son, and you've got a whole lot of hurt feelings. With the degree of animosity displayed, there was no telling if they would make up. Lee and Brandon seemed to have made amends, as they could be seen exercising together on social media during quarantine in 2020 with rock music blaring in the background. The result is a surprisingly heartwarming clip. Lee seems to have established a somewhat positive relationship with his sons, but can the same be said with his ex-wife Anderson? Despite the annulment of their marriage over 2 decades ago, Lee and Anderson have maintained an ongoing and complicated connection. In 2015, Anderson went so far as to state that Lee is the love of her life. If nothing else, the two celebrities clearly care for each other and acknowledge the impact they've had on each other's lives. For Lee, the show must always go on, even when it may not be a good idea. A couple of weeks before a highly anticipated 2022 tour with other members of Mötley Crüe, Lee fell down some stairs and broke 4 of his ribs. The star refused the advice from his doctor and instead went to drum for the tour, splitting drumming duties with Tommy Clufetos. If that isn't dedication, we don't know what is. Somehow, the world still hasn't had enough of Lee and Anderson's leaked tape scandal. Aptly titled Pam and Tommy, the recent 2022 miniseries portrayed the two superstars during one of the most distressing points of their lives. Anderson was understandably distraught by the show, as she had to live through the ordeal all over again. Lee's response, however, was much less predictable. You would think that a television show parodying one of the most difficult and trying periods of your life would be upsetting to you. It definitely threw Pamela Anderson for a loop, but Lee wasn't nearly as bothered by the new show as his ex-wife, saying that he was stoked about it. It seemed that Lee had well and truly moved on from the matter. With a career in music spanning 5 decades, it's amazing that Lee still hasn't lost the elusive touch. The 60-year-old heavy metal rock star is touring with the rest of the crew, with no plans of stopping their live performances anytime soon. Whether or not you're a fan of the genre or Lee as a person, his tenor and consistency on the stage are impressive. Rock on now and forever, Tommy Lee.
For exclusive perks like early access to new videos, priority replies to your comments, and to have your say on future content, consider becoming a Factinate member. On top of that, your support helps keep the channel going. Click the link in the description for more details.
Remember back when Tommy Lee first met Pamela Anderson? Well, after sparks flew that night, Lee embarked on a ruthless romantic pursuit. When she finally picked up the phone, she revealed that she would be doing some work in Cancun, Mexico. Lee knew exactly what he had to do. He simply told her, "I'll be there, I'll find you." When he kept his word, Anderson caved. After all, one night out couldn't hurt, could it? Of course, when it came to the cloud of drama that seemed to hang around Tommy Lee, his Scandalous tape was only the tip of the iceberg. You see, Tommy Lee had a history of being an extremely jealous partner with a hot temper, and this was a recipe for disaster. With his attractive wife working on Baywatch, he started to become extremely controlling. Whenever he set foot on set, the star would prove to be nothing but trouble. Tommy Lee's overwhelming jealousy reached a chilling climax and revealed a darker side that was as of yet unfamiliar to his wife. The couple argued, and Lee eventually kicked Anderson while she was holding their infant son Dylan. Lee allegedly left his wife with bruises and a broken fingernail. Terrified of her husband and fearing for the safety of her young children, Anderson had to call for help. That was the beginning of the end of their marriage, though the two have remained close over the years. If you enjoyed this Factinate video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more incredible stories. Want a say in who we cover next? Join our membership program through the link in the description for exclusive perks. Your support means everything to us. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.